Aloha, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Mary. I am joined along with my classmates Giada and Hannah. We are in UH Manoa in the St. John's room. And before we get started today, we would like to begin with an oli. He aloha no ka aina uluwehi. He aloha no ka aina uluwehi. Wehi ke aloha o na kupuna he. He puna vai I ka kau I ka hano. Hano hano wale o Hawaiʻi e. E ho mai ka maopopopono, hono mai uka I ka hie. Aloha e, aloha e, aloha e. Okay, to introduce Dr. Malia Akutagawa. Malia Akutagawa is a Kanako Iwi attorney from the island of Molokaʻi and is an associate professor of law and Hawaiian studies. She is part of Hui Aina Momona, a consortium of scholars at the University of Hawaii here at Manoa, charged with addressing compelling issues of Indigenous Hawaiian knowledge and practices, including the legal regime and Native Hawaiian rights associated with Malama Aina, and with a focus on cross-disciplinary solutions to natural and cultural resource management and sustainability. Malia focuses her teaching and legal advocacy work on Native Hawaiian access, gathering and religious rights, historic preservation and Native burials protection, land use and environmental law issues, climate change law, policy, adaptation and action planning, Indigenous governance, Native land back, and peacemaking utilizing traditional ho'oponopono, which is conflict resolution principles. Without further ado, here's Malia Kutagawa.
Aloha, thank you for having me. So I'll just jump right into it and share my screen. Thank you all for being here. So what I really want to share is some work that I've done in with my students as we were looking at the Molokaʻi climate, developing a Molokaʻi climate change action plan and utilizing traditional knowledge and understanding of the law together. And this was a group of students that was interdisciplinary in nature. We had NREM students, we had Hawaiian studies, law students, landscape architecture, planning, Pacific Island studies students. And these are my students that came to Molokaʻi and met with a lot of the kupuna and got their mana'o on what we're seeing in terms of climate change on Molokaʻi and identifying also solutions that are indigenous based. So this was an effort, especially championed by our Maui County Council Representative Kiani Rollins Fernandez. And so it was about a 3-year project, interviewing different people and creating sea level rise maps. And it was very interactive with QR codes, and people could scan the code and learn about where the sea level would rise in their area. And there were over like 40 stations located throughout the island. And this was being done during the pandemic. And it was really eye-opening for our community. And I just like to kind of play a short video just so you could get a feel for what it was like for us to contemplate these issues. So this was the Manaʻi.
Hey, what are you doing?
Eating?
Wait,
No, you're
sorry.
supposed to pray.
Okay.
Pray first. Thank
Sorry, I don't know why it's playing something else. Okay, let me try again. Maybe I'll try press the hyperlink. That'll be better.
Of all of this is to be able to show you guys what our community will look like in the next 80 years of sea level rise. Think it look like the veteran centers and the I am here today learning about climate change in Manaʻi, and I really enjoy what Sustainable has put out for us to see the visual of what can happen to our aina in 100 years or so is really eye-opening. A lot of my ohana come from the East End, and we always heard stories of how awesome our resources were here, and to see what climate change and how it can affect us in the long run, just kind of like hits home. Here, Waialuaya. Halava makes it real. I mean, to see the maps and stuff, it helps us to visualize what actually is going to happen. You know, I noticed that a lot of our fish ponds and lo'is will be all underwater, which is very scary for us, especially because we live subsistently. The second part is the roadways. Oh, okay. So that whole second section up here is which roadways are you most concerned about? Yeah.
It's sad. So what's there for the future for us? Yeah. I mean, we have to really seriously think about what is happening. Well, so I have seen a lot of higher high tides. I've seen a lot of roads eroding, especially on the east end. Right there at Our Lady of Seven Sorrows at Kumimi, there's only half a road. I mean, what are we going to do? The school buses can barely get through.
The purpose of this community plan is to get everybody's input to see how you guys want to adapt.
Our big questioning was like the undermining of the roads on the east end, because they don't show up as red lines as being flooded, but they're being undermined and they won't be there probably sooner than the other ones flood. That's one of our concerns.
We'll do a lot, like town, our work, where everything comes in. What really stood out to me was the wastewater treatment center. Like, not only would it be underwater, but how would it contaminate our ocean?
Being here, I learned a lot about how the water rising and climate change are going to affect us.
It's important to learn about our sea level rising, and you know, it's important for our babies to know what's going to happen in the next 80 years. Yeah.
So that'll kind of gives you a kind of understanding of the issues that we're dealing with, and how the community will be impacted over time. So what my students did in this work was to add to our climate change action plan, utilizing traditional knowledge. And so we interviewed a number of cultural practitioners and kupuna on various aspects of the ahupua'a, what was happening with invasive species, fish pond, what's happening along the shoreline. This is sort of like one example, just a short clip of me interviewing Lee Howe, a surfer, and he was kind of talking about what he sees.
Are you seeing changes in the ocean conditions too, since you surf? Or changes inside the, I don't know if you dive, but are you seeing changes along the shoreline also?
Yeah, definitely. And especially
with this area, how the river mouth is, and with weird winds of rain we've been having lately in the past 5 years, the wave movement over there is a lot different now. I feel that the wind breaks different, and it's not too often that it breaks similar to one.
Oh, mahalo nui. This is awesome.
Aloha.
So this kind of gives you a flavor of what we worked on, and in 2024 we were able to submit the climate change and sea level adaptation and resiliency plan. A lot of the work we did was getting bath water level, what was the sea level rise, and then our students added to that by doing wave modeling. We had some students working with Dr. Chip Fletcher with oceanography. So we were really fortunate that Dr. Fletcher also committed some of his own resources and students to help us get the wave modeling. So this is when we have like really severe storms, the sea level will rise even more so than this sort of bat water cup estimation. So you can see like a lot of our infrastructure. This is the main town in Kaunakakai, our police stations, our elementary schools, our wastewater facility, all underwater. And so it's something that we really have to think about in terms of managing retreat from rising seas, since a lot of our population on the east end and central Molokaʻi are coastal communities, and our roads are along the coastline. So we had to identify different priority sites for sea level adaptation and mitigation strategies. The county wanted us to to identify priority sites, but we realized we need to kind of more holistically look at this, and this led me to think more seriously about land back or Aina back. And my island has a strong history of resistance, of activism, and many of our now kupuna were also very active in Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana, having a lot of Hawaiian homestead families from Maui and Maui families tied to Kaho'olawe. And many of the work we did are in various lawsuits as to access rights and gathering rights. This was my first protest march. I was like 7 or 8 years old. This is me in the corner. And so, you know, I was raised in the midst of this movement. And our more recent fight was against Molokaʻi Ranch, where they had a desire to build 200 multi-million luxury homes on the southwest side of Molokaʻi called La'au Point. And this really came to a head until Molokaʻi Ranch decided to pull out and lay off its workers, blaming the activists for the job loss. And so the land stayed fallow since 2008. And then in 2017, the Maui News and other news outlets announced that Molokaʻi Ranch, which is actually an Asian corporation, was deciding to sell the land, which is 1/3 of our island, 55,000 acres, with a price tag of 260 million. And so it galvanized us. Initially, we thought, oh man, we have to find a benevolent buyer, or else, you know, we're gonna get somebody like Larry Ellison, who bought the whole island of Lanai. and coming in with their $1 million ideas, and having no real connection to our island. So we did a Molokaʻi Puleo or Molokaʻi Powerful in Prayer. We did a community march because what had happened in that time of strife with the ranch shutdown and massive protests against the ranch's projects was there was a lot of hard feelings between family members and the community. And so we realized that we had to come together to heal, and pray as a community and walk the land, orient ourselves to it, and mihi, or like confess or apologize to the wrongs that were committed against the land. Additionally, we knew we had to make the land so unattractive to prospective buyers. So we filed a citizen suit regarding Molokaʻi Ranch's diversion of a lot of our central Molokaʻi streams to power its projects and domestic needs. So we actually triumphed in that fight, and the State Water Commission returned to full use the Kawela stream, which was the major tributary that the ranch was using for its operations. And we realized we had to come together as a community. After a while, we realized rather than just looking at a benevolent buyer, what would be the possibility of us actually owning it outright as a community? And so we had a lot of meetings. I think this was about 3 years ago. I think we started around 4 years ago, 2022, I believe we started our meetings. And we had to look at different community ownership models and figure out how are we gonna pay for the island, how are we gonna acquire like a third of our island. And then once we acquire it, what revenue models would we need to create? And so we kind of looked at, we need a sort of special purpose vehicle that would implement, our community plan and vision. So we polled our community, and everyone said, yes, let's build this thing. Let's create this vehicle. And so it became known as the Molokaʻi Heritage Trust. And I spent a year on an interim working board creating the articles of incorporation, bylaws, policies, and procedures. And then we incorporated as a nonprofit. And so this is some screenshots from our website. And it really is it evidences like decades of battling to protect our island. And now we're at this point where we are at the driver's seat. We are, as a community, are making those decisions, for acquisition. We've created a governance structure that is community-led, and we have committees forming that will look at the economic development and prioritizing our culture and heritage. And so it was really important that we created certain values and principles to guide this effort. So this is a word cloud from our community meeting to sort of encapsulate what values will we operate by. And so that kind of helped us in creating certain pillars, cultural pillars as our values. And really it's ensuring that Aina comes first, Aina and Akua. And our vision is that, the Aina as our kupuna and our beloved Aina will become fat, will become momona. And so we want to make sure that as Kia'i, as guardians of our land, we honor that our mo'oku'aha, our genealogy, and we strive to build a healthy future for our descendants with a spirit of openness and humility and the tenacity that has brought us to this point. And so we're creating a very inclusive process where we have voting members of generational families of Molokaʻi and provisional members for those who are recently moved to the island, and then allied members who don't necessarily have a deep connection to Molokaʻi, but are our allies that support our mission and values. And so we have lots and lots of meetings, but going back to this issue of climate change, it became very evident to me that we needed to bring healing back to our island, and a lot of the lands that were owned by the ranch was dying. And it really kind of culminated in this massive drought that was compromising one of our major subsistence foods, which is the axis deer. If you look at this Google Earth capture of the Molokaʻi, you can see how dry the island is, and you can see where the ranch acquired certain headwaters and Ahupua'a in the central area, how dry it is. And it, to me, is a very stark image of the, lack of care, lack of malama. There were a lot of ranching operations and then pineapple plantations and destruction of the native forests here, such that it isn't producing as much water, and so diversion of water from other areas, other ahupua'a is necessary to make this land healthy. And so we want to be able to figure out how we can restore the mauli'ola, restore the health of the aina here. We also, my students and I, we also interviewed people belonging to the Molokaʻi Hunting Club, because we realized we have to hunt in a more pono way, and we had to bring down the deer populations, but still make it available as an important source of subsistence for our families. And so the hunting club, there's I think over 200 members, and they do a lot of service projects and aina restoration projects, and they hunt and they share the food. They have these regular meat drives. They share the food with the community, and they were really critical in the response to the deer famine in getting a lot of these carcasses off the land and buried to avoid, public health threats. So some of the things, as we interviewed kupuna and looked at sort of innovative ways that we could heal the aina, one of the things we were talking about is holistic management. It's a way that livestock have been cultivated to create a healing effect on the land. And we have a lot of erosion gullies. And so like what could be done if we created sort of like these land bridges that maybe, reduce impact along these slopes, and then plant certain kinds of grasses that the deer don't eat that could stabilize these erosion slopes. One of our students, who's actually an NREM PhD student, Louis Chow, he created his own kind of, he does coding, and so he was able to get a lot of information from different sources to sort of determine what areas are severely disturbed, what areas have native plant dominant species, what areas have alien mix, what areas are bare vegetation. So this can be a tool for us as we look at restoring Aina and prioritizing areas to restore. We also had a student project that was amazing in terms of just looking at one specific ahupa'a, or several actually, from Kawela to Kamalo, this is sort of kind of central east ahupa'a of Molokaʻi. They really did a deep dive looking at different repositories that have ike kupuna, looking at Nupepa, Mo'olelo, Mele, Oli. Also, looking at their notes from their kupuna interviews and applying traditional ecological knowledge to inform Aina restoration and what plants should be planted, even looking at native pollinators. And they talked about ho'o Hawaii, an approach of interconnectedness. And I really love the way that they did this starry map. But these are some screenshots of the starry map that they did. So they looked at different place names and their meanings. So you see here like Pu'uho'i, a heap of bitter yams, sweet potatoes and yams. You have Pili Lao stream, carpet of pili plant, a material used for thatching mountain huts. Hana Lilo area with ohia, wood that can be used as ridge posts. Pu'o Ka'eha, area brimmed with ohia ha. Kaunu o hua, an altar for fruit, probably for lono, a lush green place with fruit, especially one frequented by birds. Pepe o pai, crushed shrimp, spreads of dry land, kalo, sweet potato, terracing farming, place you can find pliable olona or other cordage. So this gave our students an indication of what possibly grew in these areas. And if anyone from Molokaʻi knows, these areas are so dry today. And it's, in my mind, unimaginable that we had all those things. From this ike, they were able to create lists of different native la'au to plant and food plants, and and also look at certain pollinators that would assist these plants. And a lot of this was inspired by Auntie Penny Martin, who makes a lot of leivili and lepo'o, and is a lover of our vaunahele and our vaula'au. And she works a lot with conservation groups to malama. And so her mana'o was in terms of looking at a largely denuded landscape on Molokaʻi. How could we bring back especially our lowland forests? Because right now conservation organizations are fencing up our Vau'akua and Vaunahele upper reaches of our Aina, but our lowland forests have died. And so she said, let's create these kipuka. And so these kipuka are, technically kipuka are areas where lava has ravaged but bypassed. So the lava flow may ravage a forest, but there's certain pockets that the lava goes around. And so these areas become seed banks for future forests to grow. And so she said, let's create these kipuka on the Aina, like small fenced areas where our native plants can flourish and the deer can walk around. Because that's one of the problems. The ungulates really eat a lot of the Aina. And so our landscape architect students did a mock-up of how these kipuka would look like and drew in certain types of native trees and shrubs and ground cover. And so that ArcGIS Starry Map shows their kipuka kit. And they call it their kipuka toolkit application, and they have various aspects like gabions that show how we can gather water, passively harvest water to support these kipuka. And it also gave me an inspiration of like modernly, like we have with the ungulates, you know, it's a height issue too. Like a lot of times we fence, but what if once we acquire Molokaʻi ranch lands, could we create structures that actually could incorporate native plants as well as native foods right on the buildings themselves? I also had a dream of how these sort of subdivisions and city type, small city would look like on Molokaʻi. And I saw that it would be in a spiral pattern to dissipate hurricane force winds. And I had another student, she did her capstone project. She's a planning student, and she really wanted to look at native pollinators and how we could support them. But I sort of shared this inspiration from my students in the Aina Vaivai class as they identified, you know, kipuka and pollinators. And so for me, it's like, oh, how could we reinvent the Vaula'au, the Vaunahele, and Vauakua on our roofs, utilizing our native pollinators as well, and protecting them from, um, grazing from these ungulates. So, for those who don't know the different Vauakua is like our highest mountaintop, and traditionally we don't touch this area. The Vauakua and the Vaukele are, the permanent cloud forests and rainforests. They're essential to holding water and letting the water pass through the different Vau and Vaula'au are lower forests, but they're really like how permaculture is called food forests. And you cannot even tell that the difference between a natural forest and one that is actually a food forest that is designed until you start to count how many plants are permanent fruiting trees or hardwoods that were used for building and crafts. Then you realize there's actually a higher volume and density of those types of plants, but they follow the rules of how a forest is laid, with ground cover, herbaceous layer shrubs, lower trees, taller trees, canopies, vines. They're all incorporated. And that was the genius of our kupuna. And then looking at our coastal hui, my students who have more of that knowledge of marine sources, they were really great in creating the wave modeling for us, and they digitize maps for us to help us in our work as we do the restoration. So this is sort of like a blow up of one of the lands, and you can kind of see a lot of this is Molokaʻi ranch lands, and you can see what kinds of growing areas these are, what kind of microenvironments are included. So this will help us as we look at the different landscape zones. They also incorporated mana'o from really our expert konohiki people like Uncle Mac Poi Poi, who knows the spawning cycles of the fish and the seaweed. who understands the how to rotate grounds, how to manage for replenishment and aina momona. So it was really wonderful interviewing him. And then, as I said earlier, talking to surfers and asking them what are they seeing. And as the coastline shifts, one of the things we have to think about too is our wetlands. In looking at Chip Fletcher's work, he talks a lot about saltwater intrusion, and how it will affect our aquifers. So as we think about retreat, do we also want to think about restoring our wetlands and actually creating new wetlands, so that we can secure our shoreline, but also encourage more natural water harvesting. And perhaps as we build up our water table, we can avoid, further mixing and compromising our aquifers. So on Molokaʻi, we have a wetland partnership, and so there's a lot of our community people involved thinking about these kinds of things. We also interviewed our kiaʻi loko, those who care for fish ponds, and one of the interesting things that our fish pond operators talked about was that there's a lot of hurdles, in permitting, and when we're looking at restoring our ponds, we also gotta look mauka. We on Molokaʻi, especially with a lot of erosion and siltation from the deer and goats. A lot of our ponds are silted over, and so there's been more work to care for the ahupua'a entirely. But what that means is, you might have to do grading and grubbing. You might have to reopen springs and wells, but then you gotta get a water use permit. You gotta get a grading and grubbing permit if you wanna restore lo'i above lo'i terraces that are held together by Java plum trees and a lot of vegetation. And so to restore ahupua'a for its intended use, you get a lot of permitting hurdles. We also have impacts on our reef from the siltation. So our students made data sheets for community monitoring and citizen science. And my law students ended up creating a Molokaʻi climate change legal primer. And they focused on 3 topics. And one was lokoʻiʻa, where we're looking at the creation and development of relationship agreements, MOAs, and so forth, in order to guide the work within these ahupua'a and fish ponds. A lot of times too, you have fish ponds are seen as historic sites and discrete historic sites. And so you run up against a lot of historic preservation laws. But what we'd like to look at is actually looking at them as traditional cultural landscapes. So how can we malama these sites as a larger contiguous whole? And another student looked at what happens when you have saltwater intrusion, and the spring lines change. And so you need to build more fish ponds. There's going to be a lot of permitting hurdles for that. But it is congruent with kilo, with observing, a Hawaiian way of observing, and creating sort of this traditional infrastructure that could create aina momona. And so these fish ponds were traditionally built around spring lines. So what happens when the spring lines change? Shouldn't we exercise our native rights to build newer fish ponds? Or as sea level rises, we might have to create more fish ponds, which used to be part of the land, but now is further inland, yeah. And then looking more modernly at resiliency hubs. So these are some of the things we're looking at. And also, you know, we have a community energy cooperative and creating microgrids. You know, what we're looking at, this is a view of Molokaʻi from Lanai, and you can see this kind of narrow, low-lying strips of land here. And so there is a possibility that parts of Molokaʻi will be cut off from each other. So does that mean we need to adopt a lifestyle that is more with boats, you know, traveling to each other by small boats? Do we have to change how we sell our goods and food? So do we need to be thinking of having like our own little inter-island shipping process, and could we be sustainable utilizing, you know, sailing vessels retrofitted with solar powered and wind powered cooling mechanism? Um, when we acquire Molokaʻi Ranch, there's an issue of Haleolono Harbor, which is just used for the canoe races. But is this something that we need to look at restoring as we sort of decentralize? And almost Paul. So one of the things, my vision is that there's so much ike on Molokaʻi. There's so much people that have, like Uncle Mac, this konohiki knowledge. I would love to see us develop an Institute of the Pacific for Indigenous and Climate Change Studies. We have the longest contiguous reef in all the islands. There's so much research that could be indigenous based, mixed also with Western science, that could help the world, as all of us throughout the Pacific are dealing with and feeling the climate change impacts more readily than other places on Earth. And for me, I think it's really important. And as I look at the lessons of Tuvalu, a disappearing island nation, where they are going to be forced to relocate to Australia, but still maintain their sovereignty. So they're facing total and complete erasure. And so they've created a digital metaverse to hold on to their culture, and to be able to pass this knowledge on to future generations. And it breaks my heart to think of our lower Pacific islands dealing with that. But how can Hawaii be a kind of Noah's Ark? How can we be a beacon that educates about the Ahupua'a system, that gives inspiration to our brothers and sisters throughout the Pacific on how we, together we're gonna deal with this in innovative as well as traditional ways, yeah. And so I'm reminded of Nainoa Thompson, who gave a keynote address to us as we were embarking on this journey of sustainability and excellence as Kanaka Oiwi. And he said to us, when you guys set the course, you are setting it for us. When you are successful, we will succeed. When you become powerful, we will be empowered. When you become intelligent and educated, teach us. I sense the course you're taking is what you all believe is absolutely the one you have to take, one you cannot let fail. So mahalo, everyone, and sorry for going a little bit long.